Brittany, thanks for joining us today.
I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, we're here to condense 26 years of life into about 25 minutes worth of conversation, right? So you came here today to share with us some stories about your experience with addiction. I thought it was important to be able to share your story with our viewership so that people could see and hear what it's like to be in your position and hear about some of the challenges you face. I know the last couple years in particular have been especially trying. I'm very proud of you that you're able to be here right now with us in order to relay these stories. And I think that Brittany has like a very eloquent and informed voice to speak on these topics. And I'm always advocating for you to be a public speaker, somebody that can really share this in a very formal setting. So why don't you tell us a little bit about whatever you want to for starters.
Well, my name's Brittany. I've been an opiate addict for 10 years. I've been to inpatient rehab 4 times in the last year, in the last 12 months, 7 times total in my life. So I'm very familiar with what it's like in Kansas City, especially, and in Georgia, to seek treatment for substance use disorder without insurance and without the proper income. On average, it costs about $1,500 a month to have treatment for substance use disorder. So I'm passionate about it like you are, in terms of there being more options for people out there, especially in the epidemic that we're in right now. You know, opiate deaths have tripled in the last 5 years. A lot of that being because of fentanyl being introduced. Half of those opiate deaths have been because of fentanyl. So you know, it's not something that we really have a lot more time to think about what we're going to do, you know. So whatever, I'm very passionate about it.
Yeah, and for anyone who's watching this and doesn't know, what is fentanyl?
Fentanyl, it's a synthetic opiate. It's made in China. It was originally made in China. It's very deadly, but it's very popular, especially in the United States, because taking it over the borders and such, like a million doses of fentanyl literally fit in a shoebox. So it's very convenient for drug traffickers. It makes good money, but because of how small the doses are, it's very easy for batches to be too potent and to kill people. And it's been, the last 3 years has really been the high market for fentanyl. And I was a fentanyl addict for 2 years. I got off heroin and I was a fentanyl addict, and I was around fentanyl addicts, and it's crazy. There's nothing like it, and it's highly addictive. It's a big thing right now. It's a big deal.
Yeah, it's around and it's highly profitable. Yeah. And even though people who are using it know how deadly, do people who use it know how deadly it is? They do.
Yes.
But at that point, is it fair to say that it might not matter to them?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very fair.
So a lot of people who are using at that point in their lives may not care whether or not that dose kills them.
Yeah, and especially, you know, a lot of the time it's cheaper than heroin use. And when your day-to-day life is just doing whatever you can to make money to get your hands on some substance, a lot of the times it does feel like it's worth your life to take a shortcut, or, you know, when there's really nothing else you're living for at that point. Yeah, so.
Right, there's so many aspects to this story, and a lot of it's centered around how does a person find the interest in healing, the willpower to heal, and what we continue to bang the drum for here is accessibility to treatments.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? So you've had a very particular experience with accessibility and treatment, but I want to back it up to the origin of this for you, because you were not born with substance abuse disorder, to your knowledge. Maybe genetically there was something at play, but my understanding is that you were prescribed opioids. Is that correct?
I was, yes, I was. When I was 16, I got ovarian cysts, and they were pretty bad. I've had those a few times, but I was living on my own at that point. You know, I had a troubled life, and I was already vulnerable, you know, to things like substance use.
Yeah, context again, because you were raised in basically a poverty situation.
Yes, I was
correct?
in a impoverished area. I was marginalized. My parents were addicts. So I was already vulnerable to that aspect of life. But yeah, I was prescribed opiates. I was prescribed oxycodone
from a doctor that you went to see.
Yes, for my ovarian cysts. And I remember just being a kid and taking them, and I just like, this is what I've been looking for my whole life, this feeling. And I think about it all the time, the origin of it, and yeah, it really just traces back to that moment. And that's something I've chased ever since, for 10 years it's been.
Can you reflect back on that experience? Do you think there was any hesitance from the prescribing physician at that time to write a script for oxycodone? Oxycodone. Do you remember there being any kind of discussion like, Brittany, this is potentially addictive, I'm giving it to you, you're a 16-year-old person. Like, what was that process like?
Absolutely not. It was just prescribed to me. And that's a lot of, my story's not, unique. It's a big thing in America. That's where opiates came from. That's where the war on drugs has come from, is really a nonchalantness in the prescribing of opiates and the over-prescribing of opiates.
Yeah, and I think journalistically, we've come to realize that was incentivized, the overprescription, which we can, legislatively and from a holier-than-thou sort of perspective, we can criminalize pot use, but we reward opioids. Yeah. So backing up, so you were prescribed opioids at 16. And at the time, there was no discussion from the physician about the potentiality for these to be addictive. There was no looking at your family to see if addiction ran in the family. No. There was no discussion of the context in which you were using them. There was no integration or follow-up. They wrote the script for pain, ovarian cyst, something very real that you're dealing with at 16 years of age, and you were sent on your way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. I had one refill, so I took those for 2 months. And my body wasn't physically dependent. It was very small doses, But I remember not wanting to stop. And I had a neighbor that I would buy prescription pain medicine from, Vicodins. And that's really just where it took off. And then shortly after, I think when I turned 18, my body became physically dependent on the opiates. And it was just, my body's been physically dependent ever since.
So there may have been some sense at the beginning of your use that, like you said, this is the feeling you've been looking for all your life.
Yeah.
At 16, coming from a situation where both your parents were addicts, and it was an impoverished household, and you didn't have a lot of support at all or love in the home, and then you have this thing that gives you tremendous
comfort and self-esteem, and
and so if you were predisposed for addiction genetically to begin with, then that probably just let the cat out of the bag entirely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So years of use, and you're able to maintain and sustain a life, work, have an apartment, maintain friendships, relationships. Did things escalate and start to become too heavy at a certain point? Was it a compounding thing?
I can remember where it all went wrong. There's a long time of my substance use where I was in denial about it, and I was using every day, and I was living to use and using to live. And then one day I just stopped being able to pay my bills. It was around 3 years ago I stopped being able to pay my bills. I lost my apartment, I lost my car. I kept working. It's really like dominoes at a certain point when you start to lose everything. And I spent 2 years homeless on the streets, living in heroin houses. There's a lot of things you don't think you'll ever do. You think you're better than other addicts, but at the end of the day, addiction leads to jails, institutions, and death. And there's no exceptions for that. I remember sitting in a crisis center, surrounded by homeless people in armchairs, and just being like, "Wow, I'm no different than anybody in this room." You don't get to keep anything in addiction.
So you didn't think of yourself like the other as you were becoming someone in that position.
Yeah.
At the time, did you refer to yourself as an unhoused person or a homeless person? Do you think people who are dealing with that refer to themselves as unhoused or homeless?
I always had an excuse.
Yeah.
Because I am a smart girl, but at the end of the day, I've realized that it doesn't matter what I was. Addiction doesn't discriminate, and I'm still a smart girl, you know. It's just, you know, people are marginalized to succumb to addiction. You know, we have 45 million people that live under the poverty level in the United States, and we have 40 million people living with opiate addiction. And studies are showing more and more often these years that those populations overlap. And, you know, people are forced to get into drug trafficking to survive, and they're selling to the people that are closest to them in their community, you know. It's just, at the end of the day, I was set up for a life of addiction. But I'm very grateful, you know, I have 4 months clean now.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's the most I've ever had in 10 years. So now I just, you know, I want to get the word out. There's a lot of people dying every day, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And, you know, we are working on telling the story about this emerging sector of medicinal psychedelics.
Yeah.
All right. And every time I learn about something new, I get excited for you and people who are dealing with what you're dealing with. And like I said at the beginning, we're talking about accessibility to treatments and changing the public perception so that legislation can move and so that we can start to really mobilize on making treatments available. What kind of treatments, before we get into what psychedelics can do for someone who's dealing with substance abuse disorder, what kind of treatment have you received in the form of medication or counseling or places to stay? What have you experienced in healing process that's available to you?
You know, it's very limited. Luckily, Kansas City in the last couple of years has expanded a little bit in terms of sober living, but in terms of inpatient rehab, there's really only one place for women right now that offers room and board for 29 days. They don't offer any more without insurance and without the income. And you don't owe anything back, but you know, it took me, I went to that place like 6 times. You know, I would have loved to have had a different option. Obviously something wasn't working, but that was the only option that was available to me. In terms of detox centers, there is one in Kansas City that is open to people without insurance and without the income. It has, I believe, 8 men's beds and 3 women's beds. You know, I had a relapse 4 months ago. I'm still on the waiting list for a bed and detox. So might get that call any day, but obviously. And then there has been a bed there for me when I've needed it, and I'm very grateful, but I think all the time, like, what would have happened to me if I was on the waiting list like this and I did need that bed. You know, there are people that don't have 4 months to wait for a bed. And then just in terms of sober living, there are houses. There's actually quite a variety of houses in Kansas City, which is a good thing. But you know, everything's very cookie cutter. There's really only one way to do it in terms of medication. Suboxone is available. Luckily for me, it was a miracle drug. It has saved my life many times. But for a lot of people, I know many people personally that Suboxone does not work for them.
Suboxone is a drug that is supposed to replace heroin?
Yeah, for people that are opiate dependent, like for me, I cannot make it through a detox on my own. I have seizures. It's just the way our brains are wired. It's like it's a survival mechanism, and we will relapse over and over and over again if we are forced to go through the detox on our own. So Suboxone really steps in at the beginning, and it cuts all your withdrawals. It stops the detox process, and then every day it covers the opiate receptors on your brain because they're broken. Because I've used opiates for so long, I have so many opiate receptors. So really, it just takes care of those. It stops the cravings, manages the withdrawals. So it's really, I'm opiate dependent, and it helps me live a normal life being opiate dependent.
So your understanding of your own physiology, your own neurology, is that through repeated use of opioids, something has changed in the chemistry, the neurochemistry of your brain, to where you need it in order to function.
Absolutely.
Because you have been working a full-time job and taking the bus and doing a 9-hour shift and coming back, and still that whole time your neurology is focused on the next opportunity to feed this addiction.
I mean, I'm one of the lucky ones. I was able to hold a job from almost all my addiction, but it wasn't a healthy thing, you know, because I would go like 62 days without a day off, and if I had a day off, day 63, I would have nothing to show for it, you know, because my addiction just didn't take a day off. It was just working every day to feed my habit and to not be sick, and it's crazy.
Yeah. So when I hear about psychedelic treatments for individuals with substance abuse disorder, I'm still learning about the science of it, right? But I think that it's supposed to be helping heal the brain on a neurochemical, neurological level. And part of what you contend with when you're in that position is just feeling happy isn't like feeling happy for everybody else, you know? You're not even adept to have positive mood swings from moment to moment. So staying inspired, staying fixated on healing yourself, those are incredibly lofty goals, right?
They are.
Yeah.
The dopamine receptors in our brain, when we're using, and I've been using for 10 years, the dopamine gets so high that it's not at a normal level anymore. Like your regular dopamine's here, and the dopamine you exceed is here, and then that becomes your regular amount of dopamine it takes to even feel it anymore. So it takes pretty much, they just tell you you're SOL. It's going to take at least 2 years for your brain to be able to produce dopamine again normally. And that's where a lot of people, especially me, like struggle with recovery. Why it's taken me so long, because it's very miserable. It's a miserable process. And I think if there was something out there like ketamine-assisted therapy, I think that would have really worked for me.
And the other plant medicine, psychedelic, that we hear a lot about helping with substance abuse disorder is ibogaine.
Yeah.
And it's just that we're so out of step with the reality that we live in and the conjecture looking at the future of what might be possible.
Yeah.
So while we're in this reality where people are dying and dying and dying and dying and dealing with this epidemic, right, we're sort of kind of plodding along towards maybe changing our minds, but really evasive action is needed, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it is, absolutely.
Yeah. If there were clinics, for example, if there was a clinic in this city, which Kansas City is probably representative of a lot of mid-sized American cities, do you think, knowing, you know, from your peers, like, because you have peers who are also dealing with what you're dealing with, do you think that people would find out about the option for a therapy and be willing to embrace it?
Absolutely. I mean, because like I was saying about the Suboxone, I mean, that's readily available, but for a lot of people it doesn't work. So they can't even get access to Subutex or to methadone, let alone something like ketamine-assisted therapy. You know, I think people would really embrace that.
Well, we keep talking about accessibility and the cost of these therapies, and like we were visiting with Ann Bethune earlier today, there's quite a price tag affixed to these therapies, right? Which just doesn't work with the people that need them the most, right? So
they're all below the poverty line.
Right. Yeah. And at that point, your means are extremely limited, right? So what we have to do, I think, is with programs like this, with discussions like this, just continue to get it in front of people so that when ballot measures are introduced, when public discourse is happening, if, say, people say, oh, I don't like psychedelics, they need to be informed, right? Because we have to have a bigger way of thinking about the culture that we live in and the variety of experience that humans are enduring within that, right? Yeah. So I'm very hopeful, because when I think about psychedelic plant medicine working with someone with substance abuse disorder, I think about the infusion. People talk about a sense of love, a sense of peace, a sense of reaffirmation, a sense of value. From what you've told me and from what I've heard about your condition and other people's, that's hard to come by.
There's none of that in early recovery.
Organically, right? That's not being produced in your brain. It's not in your spirit, the conviviality. It's not there, right?
Absolutely. So, especially for most of us deal with mental health disorders, you know, on top of that.
Yeah, on top of it, right? So if you could get into a clinic and have an infusion, whether it's intramuscular or intravenous or through the trochee, under the tongue, and then have a sense of a break from what you've been experiencing, the day-to-day hardship, the depression, the low feeling, the reality of the poverty, the pain of the addiction, the pain in the body, everything that comes along with that, it would be a tremendous relief.
Absolutely.
Right? So that kind of research is ongoing. Those trials are happening. The data is being collected, but it just needs to move so much more quickly.
It does. It absolutely does.
Yeah. Since we have this forum today, what else would you like to share with our viewership that you think people should know about the reality of substance abuse disorder in the United States, because that's where we are, and what you wish could be different, and maybe some myths that people have that should be dispelled so that we can get a better understanding of what we're up against and transcend it?
Yeah. I've always been a big advocate on, people talking on addiction, like people choose to live this way. I've always been really passionate about that. Addiction is a disease. Nobody chooses to live like this. The way I've lived the last few years has been nothing short of miserable, and nobody would wake up every day and choose to live like that. Your brothers and sisters and friends and colleagues are addicts. They're dying every day, and it's gotten to a point where it's blatant and it's serious, and that's really all I have to say. Is I'm ready for there to be a change in the way that we treat addicts, the way we imprison addicts, and the way we shame addicts, because it's not helpful, and it's working against the people that we love.
Even when people aren't using psychedelics in a clinical fashion to accomplish a medical reaction, we talk about their nature to open our hearts and create empathy. Yeah. So really what we're talking about, Brittany, is empathy, right?
Yeah.
Because we have to be a more empathetic culture to be able to hold healing space for our brothers and sisters who are dealing with realities that can be so twisted and so dark and so isolating. And my hope is that as we continue to share information about this burgeoning psychedelic scene and reality in America, that people will become more kind-hearted, open-hearted, innovative, and see the value in picking up our brothers and sisters and helping them do healing things with their lives. I see the potential in us to be advocates for one another more than we have now. I think coming out, and you've been dealing with this in this pandemic year as well,
It's been a mess,
which just laid a whole other level of complexity on top of everything.
It does, yep.
For you and anybody else in a position where things were already hard to begin with.
There was times this year where I would hear of detox centers just shutting down completely and sending everybody home. I mean, it breaks my. I could not even imagine being in a detox center detoxing and then being told to pack up and go home.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I wanted to make sure that you had the chance to come in and share on this forum that we're developing.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure you had the chance to share what you felt like was important, because your voice is valuable. And do you feel like you've been able to get some of that out today? I know it's a lot to kind of tackle this in this setting, but I think you've done a great job as usual. Yeah, and I think it's important that you continue to heal so that your own natural gift of being able to speak to your experience can help get the word out so that other people can find healing as well, right? Yeah. So, we'll continue doing this. Please come back and update us. Do you feel like you got out what you wanted today? All right, cool. So we'll continue covering this as best we can, and hoping that those who are watching this feel inspired to educate themselves about substance abuse disorder, about the role that psychedelics can possibly play in finding lasting, transformative healing and change for people who need it most, and that we can continue to develop a more empathetic and caring and humane society together at this time where it's so direly needed. Brittany, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Love you.
I love you.